There's always stuff surrounding this team. Jimmy Kempski, PhillyVoice.com. The Eagles getting closer to the draft, Jimmy, and they are meeting with quarterbacks. I wonder, do you legitimately feel that they are interested in drafting a quarterback, or is this just smokescreen city?
Do I think they have legitimate interest in a quarterback, or is it just this crazy, elaborate smokescreen? I would say that you can bank on it. They're going to draft a quarterback. It's just a matter of who and in what round. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, Doug Peterson kind of said it earlier this offseason, and not in like a very public way where I don't think you expected it to really kind of blow up and get out. And then Jeffrey Lurie just said pretty frankly at the owners' meeting, we're going to draft a quarterback. So, I don't think there's any question about it. They're going to draft a quarterback again, only a matter of what guy and when do they get him.
Jimmy, I'm a little perplexed that they would be interested in a guy at number 8, though. I mean, they just signed Bradford. They brought in Daniel. I mean, when you're at number 8, it feels like this team has more holes rather than to grab a guy to grab a clipboard. I understand if you have a chance to get a franchise guy, you grab one. But does any one of these guys scream franchise player must have when I already just paid a guy $30+ million?
I really like Carson Wentz a lot. I really do. I think he's got everything you want. He's got a strong arm. He's smart. He has good mobility. And, while he played at a lower level in college, he ran a pro-style offense. So he knows how to make reads. He can take, he's done drops from under center where a lot of these guys play almost solely from the shotgun. He calls plays in the huddle. So he's a guy that, I think is a little bit more pro-ready than what people are giving him credit for. Now, they did pay a lot, like you mentioned, to Sam Bradford, and they paid a lot to Chase Daniel. They paid very, very good backup money to Chase Daniel. So you're right. They have a lot of money invested in that quarterback position. But the 2-year deal that they gave to Sam Bradford tells me that they don't really, or they have questions rather about him as the answer in terms of their long-term answer at quarterback. So I think it makes total sense for them to get a guy at 8 or even maybe move up a little bit to get a guy like Carson Wentz or maybe even Jared Goff. And, they actually have a luxury now because they are kind of set in the short term with Bradford and Daniel that they don't have to throw the guy to the wolves in his rookie season. They can let him develop for a year. And then when you look at what the Eagles have in terms of their coaching staff, very quarterback-oriented. Doug Peterson was a former quarterback coach. Frank Reich was a former quarterback and former quarterback coach. And you have John DeFilippo, who's a former quarterback coach, who's an offensive coordinator, now he's a quarterback coach again. And then even Chase Daniel, who kind of played that, that sort of quarterback sidekick role with Drew Brees and Alex Smith. They kind of think that he can be a help in that regard as well. So they're really equipped to be able to draft a quarterback and bring him along, I think. So I think it makes total sense for them to draft a quarterback at some point during the draft, and it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if they did so in the first round.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now they're going to look at Hackenberg tomorrow. A lot of people around here have very mixed reviews on him. He's the kind of guy that I guess you would take a shot on in the 3rd or 4th round. Connor Cook, I guess you're okay with that, just saying, because there's no pressure. But you bring a guy in with pick number 8, and Bradford plays like he did the first 7 games of the year, you're going to have anarchy.
Yeah, they're going to want him to play. Yeah,
exactly.
They're going to want him to play, or they're going to want Chase Daniel to play, or they're going to want somebody else to play. So yeah,
it's hard to draft a guy at number 8 when your quarterback is playing so up and down. And
then again, I think that the counter argument to that though is if Sam Bradford does play the way he did in the first 7 games of the season, you're pretty happy that you drafted that guy.
Yes, indeed. But on the flip side, then, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, if Bradford plays the way he did over the final 7 games or plays better than that, do you need a quarterback at number 8?
Well, that's a good problem to have because now you have a young quarterback that you think can be your guy long term, and you have a guy in Sam Bradford who played, well enough, and maybe now Sam Bradford has trade value in the 2017 offseason.
There's obviously so many ways to skin this thing, and I guess the question goes to: this is a team that's 7-9. Are they so equipped to not need to find an impact player at another position, I guess, is really the question. When you're at number 8, you don't want to be back in that position. If you can get an impact player at a spot where, they need some. I just feel at number 8 they have so many It's such a weird spot for them to draft because they have two tackles that are going to start, right? I mean, Peters is going to play left and Johnson's going to play right. So you take a tackle, you're moving him to a new position in his first year or two. There's probably not a corner that you love at that spot. I think being at number 8, they're really in an interesting situation here, Jimmy.
Yeah, they're in a spot where they can move around. I think at 8, at the cornerback spot, I think Vernon Hargraves could be a possibility there.
Yeah.
From what I've heard, tackle is not going to be an option in the first round if they stay at 8 anyway. And how I came to that conclusion is, there's the one offensive tackle in this draft that is, head and shoulders above everyone else. It's Laramie Tunsil from Ole Miss. And then beyond him, the guy that I guess a lot of people kind of have slated to the Eagles is Ronnie Stanley of Notre Dame. And what I hear from talking to NFL people, he's kind of in the same tier as guys like Jack Conklin from Michigan State and Taylor Decker from Ohio State. And he's not really separated himself from those guys. They kind of see him in that same kind of tier as those guys. So when you look at what the Eagles did when they moved up from 13 to 8, and again, this is all dependent on whether they would have all three of those guys rated similarly as well. To move up from 13 to 8, there's a great chance that obviously one of those three guys is going to be sitting there at 13. As long as you move up from 13 to 8 to grab a guy who's similarly rated to those other two. So I don't really see them drafting an offensive tackle in that first round. The other thing to note there too is Howie Roseman at the owners' meetings said that the offensive line in general is it's deeper this year. He named the offensive line and defensive tackle as the two deepest positions in this draft. And he said their draft board has more offensive linemen on it than it has in years. So they think of it as a deep draft. I think they're going to draft offensive linemen in quantity, but I don't think you're going to get them in the first round.
Talking with Jimmy Kempski here, PhillyVoice.com. And one other thing on that quarterback situation, where, all right, you got Wentz, as you mentioned, you like him, Goff, and then Paxton Lynch. I feel that all three of these guys, some people like Wentz, like you, some people like Goff, they think he's the best. Others, there's some darker. Paxton Lynch is like Bernie Sanders, man. There's like a little group of people who like him out there. Which of those is the most realistic to be there at number 8?
Oh, well, Lynch will be there. Yeah, if they want to draft Paxton Lynch, he's going to be there at 8. But I don't really think I would think that they pass on him at 8. He has everything you want physically. He's tall. He's got a really good arm. I think his mobility is a little bit overrated, but he's definitely, very mobile for his size. I think people kind of see him as, people have compared him to like Colin Kaepernick. That's not even close. I mean, he can run a little bit, but he's mobile for his size. And he's got nice touch on his pass occasion, but the problem that you have with him is he ran a completely remedial offense in college. And he ran a wing T in high school, so doesn't really have much experience at all running anything close to a pro-style system. And he operated almost solely out of the shotgun, didn't call plays in the huddle, never took drops from under center. Didn't really have much in the way of going progression from receiver 1, 2, 3, and so on. And he's even admitted that he's behind. So that's a guy that I think some people think is going to take not just 1 year, but 2 years before he can play him. So from the Eagles' perspective, like I mentioned earlier, they do kind of have the luxury of being patient because they do have Sam Bradford and Chase Daniel locked down for at least the next 2 years. So they do have that luxury of taking their time with the quarterback that they may draft. But for a guy who's that big of a prospect, to take with the 8th overall pick, that is not something that I think it would be really a smart investment.
You don't want to knock that wing T. It worked for Tubby Raymond. Jimmy Kempski with us from PhillyVoice.com. Jimmy, is Ezekiel Elliott a legit option?
Well, at the owners' meetings again, Howie Roseman really seemed to sell the idea that they would take him. If we were looking for my opinion here, I wouldn't go that route. And the reason why is because of the position that he plays. A lot of people like to make the point that you can find a running back anywhere in the draft. You can just find them off the street and plug them in, and they can play well for you. And Howie Roseman actually kind of dispelled that myth a little bit, and he said, in the last 10 years, running backs finishing in the top 10 in rushing, almost the vast majority of them were taken early in the draft. So I went back and fact-checked it, and he's right. I think it was like 35 or something like that. of 50. There are 50 total running backs that finished in the top 10 the last 10 years. And I think there were like 35 that were taken in the first 2 rounds of the draft. There were like 4 that were undrafted. There were like 3 or 4 total that were drafted in like the 5th or 7th round. So that is kind of a myth that you can just pick them off the street or get them late in the draft and plug them in and they'll be stud running backs. However, when I look at, the longevity of running back careers, it's probably the one position in the NFL where it's got the shortest shelf life. So you're not going to get a lot of mileage out of a running back typically when you draft them. And then secondly, more specific to this year in particular, Ezekiel Elliott is the only slam dunk, first-round pick in this draft at running back. When you look ahead to 2017, there are an enormous amount of running backs that are going to be draft eligible, like Leonard Fournette from LSU, Nick Chubb from Georgia, McCaffrey from Stanford, Royce Freeman from Oregon. I'm missing somebody in there too, but there's just a ton of them. There's just so many running backs that are going to be available next year. And if you can get one of those guys late in the first round or at some point in the second round next year, I think that serves as a much higher value than taking a guy like Elliott at, again, that high at 8th overall.
Jimmy Kempski is with us, PhillyVoice.com. Jimmy, I really like Miles Jack. Some people think he might be the best player. The Eagles, they're pretty good at linebacker, but would you be surprised if he fell to 8? Is he too good to pass up?
He's not going to be there at 8. so I guess what I'm saying there is I agree with you. He's awesome. He's just a phenomenal player. The last 2 years, the Eagles, had there are 2 UCLA defenders who made sense for the Eagles. 2 years ago it was Anthony Barr. He was outside linebacker, pass rusher. Last year it was Michael Kendrick's brother, Eric Kendricks. I thought both of those guys kind of make sense for the Eagles. So I watched both of those guys play leading up to the draft, and Miles Jack would just do stuff that would divert my attention, and I wind up just watching Jack, and I would just get totally sidetracked. I just stopped watching Barr or Kendrick, both of whom, by the way, are really playing very well in the NFL. I just start watching Jack because he was just more fun to watch. So he's that good, and you're right. You say some people think of him as the best player in the draft. He may be. Tunsil's up there, and Jalen Ramsey from Florida State, they're up there. He's up there too. But Jack, Jack has the knee issue, so I get that may be a little bit of a cause for concern. When you talk about the Eagles linebackers, they do kind of have their starter set with Bradham and Jordan Hicks and Michael Kendricks. But that's a guy where if he is there at 8 somehow, you just go, you know what, I'm taking him. Who cares?
Jimmy Kempski's with us. And he I saw some teams working him out as a safety, almost like a Thomas Davis type player. And Thomas Davis turned out to be a pretty good player. So that shows you what kind of athleticism that he has, that some teams are even looking at him. Well, there you go.
UCLA too.
Yeah, he could be the next J.J. Watt, play a little defense, get in the backfield, catch a couple passes. I'm sure, if he's an unbelievable type of player. But what's your thoughts on Bosa? I see that you had your rankings of the top 8 players, and he's number 8. Would he be a guy that if he fell to number 8? I saw, a couple months ago, Jimmy, he was number 1 on people's boards.
Yeah, he had a monster 2014 season. He had 13.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, a bunch of tackles for loss. I'm sure he had a lot of Harrys. But he didn't really have as big of an impact in 2015. Part of that is because he drew more attention from opposing offenses, and he did kind of free up his teammates to do a little bit more. But when I look at him, and I think he's going to be a very good defensive end in the NFL. But when I look at him and the kind of player that he is, and does he have that elite type athleticism that you'd want from a pass rusher that you're going to take in the top 10? And I don't know that I really see that he's got a really huge upside. I look at a guy like DeForest Buckner, for example. That guy's 6'7", 291, and just has crazy athleticism. I take him over Joey Bosa, any day of the week. Even though Buckner is kind of more like a more classic fit as a 3-4 defensive end with his length. I wouldn't care. I would just look at his size and athleticism and say he can play 4-3 defensive end and move inside on occasion. For me, any day. So I think when I look at their ceilings, I think that a guy like Buckner has a much higher ceiling than a guy like Joey Bosa.
Jimmy, what about Jimmy, what about the wideout position? After the Ruben Randall deal, I know it's not that great a wide receiver class in this year's draft. Do you think they feel okay at wideout, or?
Yeah, I think they'll draft. I think there's certainly, that's the wide receiver position is certainly a position they can address. And they've actually brought in a bunch of wide receivers already with their 30 allotted pre-draft visits. And it looks like the guys that they've brought in so far are, they kind of lean towards speed guys as opposed to, size guys. So, yeah, I can see them drafting wide receiver, but there isn't going to be a guy that's good enough to be taken 8th overall. Like Laquan Treadwell is a guy that people were high on before, but I think his measurables are kind of scaring people off with how fast he is. Actually, I think the wide receiver from Baylor, Corey Coleman's better than Treadwell, but again, neither of those guys are going to be taken at 8th overall.
Well, this time of the year it gets crazy. You start to hear the rumors, you start to hear everything out there. But good conversation with Jimmy as the Eagles draft number 8. And really a weird spot. I mean, they were at 13. They traded up. And some would think if you move up, it's because you were targeting somebody. We'll have to figure out who that person is. By the way, it was the Frogger. That was what happened. He tried to help Slippery Pete, tried to get the Frogger across the street for George because he had the high score.
And he called the outlets the holes.
Slippery Pete.
Yes.
Gotta love it.
That's
Peter Stamori. Yeah.
We're here at Chickies and Pete's. He's Pete. I'm Mike. That's Jimmy Kempski from PhillyVoice.com. Thanks, pal. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.